You stir slowly, the movement hardly noticeable in the deepening gloom. The light that filters into your room is thin and gray, hesitant to fully cross over the lip of the valley or through the narrow window slit. Before you even open your eyes fully, you feel it, the undeniable chill. It does not arrive suddenly but seeps up from the flagstones beneath the bed, a damp, persistent cold that clings to the bones and settles in the marrow. You are wrapped in layers, always layered, a necessary armor against the season's caprice and the night's deeper chill. First, there is the delicate linen chemise, thin cotton or flax perhaps, which feels cool against your skin. Over that rests the thicker wool shift, smelling faintly of lanolin and wood smoke, a scent that has become entirely synonymous with warmth itself. Then comes the outer gown, weighted slightly by the rough weave of undyed wool. Each layer holds its purpose, a small defense mechanism stitched into your daily existence. The weight of the garments is almost comforting in its predictable reality. You consider how cumbersome this preparedness feels in the dim light. Unlike some worlds you cannot recall, where simple sleep seems to require minimal obstruction, here, every shift and gown serves an undeniable function: insulation. This necessity defines a part of your physical reality before the day has even truly begun. You manage to lift your head slowly, taking a deep, shallow breath. The air is heavy, carrying the clean, earthy scent of damp stone mixed with the residue of last night's banked fires. It smells profoundly still. If you listen carefully, beyond the sound of your own breathing, there is a faint, muffled murmur from somewhere beyond the immediate walls. Perhaps the lowing of cattle settling in for the day's first meal, or the soft, rhythmic clink of wooden pots being moved and stacked nearby. Rising requires an effort that feels deliberate, almost ceremonial. You draw your legs out from beneath the heavy covers, feeling the sudden shock of cold against the soles of your bare feet. The floor is hard, polished smooth by centuries of countless passing steps, your own many times before you even recall them. You pause to feel the texture under your toes, noting the slight unevenness, a tiny grain of grit or dust embedded in the stone's permanence. You reach out, perhaps for a discarded shawl or merely to steady yourself, and your fingertips brush against the rough-hewn wooden frame of the bedstead. The wood is dry, almost brittle under the touch, bearing the subtle patina of old hands and constant use. It tells tales of lives lived and slept upon it. The rising process slows your mind into a manageable pace. You notice details that would pass unnoticed in an era less bound by stone and wool. The way the meager light catches dust motes dancing lazily in the slight current of air. The dark stain near the corner where a spill, perhaps of ale or rendered fat, has dried permanently into the stone floor. Your attention is drawn toward the hearth space. It is currently quiet, but you know that soon it will begin to assert itself. The remaining embers glow with a deep, sullen orange heat, barely keeping the chill at bay in this corner of the dwelling. You observe how the faint smoke, already rising imperceptibly into the cool air, suggests the readiness for rekindling. This fire is not merely warmth, it is the heart's core, regulating time and life within these walls. A low hum starts to vibrate through the morning's silence. It might be the distant call of a vendor preparing his wares, or simply the gentle shifting of the community waking up around you. These sounds are never loud or sudden. They swell gradually, like tide coming in. They signal not an event, but merely the return of the ordinary day. You move toward the small basin of water kept for washing hands and face. The cold shock is immediate, sharp, invigorating. You cup your hands beneath the flow and draw a slow breath over the cool liquid, allowing the dampness to settle your skin. This simple ritual washes away not only sleep's haze, but also the lingering weight of night's unconscious existence. As you stand there, water dripping slowly from your chin, you feel connected to countless others who have performed this same small act in this very spot over centuries. You are participating in a ritual of continuity, the simple necessity of beginning the day within established rhythms. The life here is structured by elemental forces, the rising sun, the need for heat, the turning tides and seasons. Everything has its appointed time, and you are finding your place within that slow, steady rhythm. The very concept of waking feels weighty. It means transitioning from a state of nothingness to one of necessary action, where every movement requires fuel, physical sustenance provided by the coming fire, and emotional stamina required for the day's transactions. You gather yourself, accepting this demanding pace, finding a quiet resolve in the cool stone beneath your feet and the necessity of the dawn. The world is waiting not with fanfare, but with the muted promise of first light, demanding that you meet it with slow, thoughtful preparation, layer upon careful layer, both physically and mentally. The last vestiges of the deep morning cold are still clinging to your exposed skin, a faint chill that seems woven into the very texture of the stone floor. You move slowly from where you slept, acutely aware of the layers beneath your rough-spun gown. The linen chemise against your chest, perhaps a wool shift underneath all of it. Each movement is deliberate, unhurried, because the cold insists on paying attention to every joint and fold of cloth. The air in the longhouse or cottage smells of banked wood smoke and damp earth, a specific blend that has been the scent of survival for generations. You reach your hands toward the hearth, where last night's remnants still glow with the deep, hungry heat of embers. The task of coaxing fire back to life is not merely about making warmth. It is about establishing the very center of the domestic day. You kneel, or perhaps bend low if the floor is packed dirt, gathering pieces of kindling that have been stored nearby, thin, dry sticks gathered on previous days, ready for this necessary ritual. They feel brittle and slightly sharp under your fingertips. The wood you gather must be perfect, dried enough not to turn to acrid smoke immediately, yet substantial enough to catch a flame properly. You notice the quality of the kindling, how the gray outer bark flakes away from the lighter inner wood, revealing its trapped warmth. It is an economy of material, this process. Nothing can be wasted when heating and cooking are vital acts of preservation. As you begin arranging these small pieces into a careful nest upon the glowing embers, your fingers brush against the cool, soot-stained stones surrounding the hearth, stones that have absorbed the heat and life of countless breakfasts before you. You breathe in deeply, taking in the mingled aromas, the metallic tang of cold ash mixing with the sweet, resinous smoke from the kindling. It is a scent of sustained habitation. Next comes the process of coaxing the flame into greater life. It requires patience, a steady hand, and an understanding of how fire breathes. You slowly blow upon the nascent flames, not aggressively, but with gentle, rhythmic breaths. Each puff of air causes a tentative flare, urging the embers to take hold. The small pops and sizzles are immediate feedback, the sound of slow-burning potential finally being released into open flame. Watching this happen is an education in fundamental forces. You see controlled combustion, transforming meager fuel into life-giving heat and light. A faint, drifting curl of smoke lifts towards the low rafters, momentarily obscuring your view before dissolving into the greater volume of air. The immediate goal shifts now to sustenance. The embers are enough for stoking a cooking pot, likely an iron kettle or a thick earthenware vessel, to become ready for the day's meal. You carefully adjust the arrangement of larger pieces of kindling around the existing coals, forming a stable base where the water-thick porridge will simmer slowly over hours. As you place the pot upon the tripod supports above the flames, you feel the comforting weight and permanence of it, a piece of necessity that connects this small hearth to every other hearth in the village or town. There is an inherent rhythm in these morning preparations, gathering fuel, coaxing life from dead wood, then tending the vessel of food. It is a physical liturgy performed before breakfast is even eaten. You watch the steam beginning to rise gently from the pot, misting slightly under the low ceiling beams. The smell intensifies now. It is no longer just smoke and ash, but the foundational scent of grains, the promise of oats or barley porridge. The mixture smells earthy, slightly sweet, grounded in the harvest cycle. The process forces you to slow your movements down further, anchoring yourself into the immediate reality of temperature and material. You observe how the early morning light, when it finally starts to filter through the small window slits, catches the dust motes dancing above the steam. They float lazily, illuminated tiny specks in the rising warmth, a momentary sparkle against the pervasive gray. This detail, the way the sunlight interacts with floating particles, is often overlooked but anchors you deeply into the present moment. You consider the sheer amount of labor that goes into this simple bowl of porridge. The grain must be milled far away, using oxen and large stones, the wood gathered from surrounding woodlands, the pot crafted by a specialized artisan. Your family's morning meal is thus a product of complex systems: agriculture, engineering, forestry, and manual skill. It is not just food, it is stored effort. This realization gives weight to the simplicity of the task at hand. While the porridge needs simmering, you turn your attention back to the woodpile. You gather a few more pieces, not for the fire immediately, but for later kindling or perhaps to supplement the cooking heat. Your hands brush over various types of wood: smooth beechwood, rough oak limb, and brittle alder. Each type carries a different weight, suggesting a different history in its growth. You lightly run your fingers over the grain lines on one piece. It feels solid, dense, having lived through years of slow growth. This contrast between the permanence of the forest wood and the fleeting nature of your own wakefulness is subtly striking. After ensuring the initial fire has caught a sustainable rhythm, a steady heat that promises hours of gentle warmth, you move to prepare the basic bread components. Perhaps gathering water from an internal well or simply mixing the coarse meal with water in a wooden trough. The grain, already milled into flour, has a scent distinct from the smoky porridge. It is dry, faintly nutty, and utterly fundamental. You need the small amount of dough needed for this morning's staple bread, a process that requires a specific, firm pressure to develop the gluten within the coarse meal. The slight stickiness of the wet grain contrasts sharply with the dry resilience of the wood chips you handle moments before. The simple act of working the dough is deeply satisfying in its physicality. It grounds your body and mind simultaneously. You feel the tension release in your forearms as the mass stretches under your palms, becoming smooth and pliable. This tactile feedback becomes a quiet meditation, forcing focus onto touch and resistance. There are no complex thoughts needed, only consistent, gentle work. The scent profile of the home is rich now. The smoke from the hearth, the dampness from the well water, the sweet rising steam of the porridge, and the yeasty tang of the dough. These smells weave together to form a unique sensory map of domesticity, a comforting tapestry of ordinary existence. You pause, allowing these overlapping scents to settle around you. You gather your outer layers of clothing again, adjusting the edges of your gown. The fabric is reassuringly heavy, built not for beauty, but for endurance against the cold and the rigors of the coming day. As you contemplate the necessary steps, the fire maintained, the meal rising, the clothes prepared, you reflect on the profound necessity of routine. Routine here is synonymous with survival. It is the knowledge that if this rhythm breaks down, the precarious balance of life in this harsh climate could be severely jeopardized. Each small action echoes a continuity stretching back untold generations. The slow preparation means you have time to observe the domestic architecture itself. The low beams overhead, designed more for function than decoration. The worn-wear patterns on the floor where people always gather near the heat. The careful storage of tools and implements in their designated places. Everything speaks to efficiency and sustained use over decades, if not centuries. You smooth down the apron tied around your waist, a final gesture of preparation. The quietude holds you now, the early morning hours stretching before the full clamor of daybreak arrives. You are centered within this warmth you have painstakingly constructed, waiting for the necessary transition from deep night to structured labor, feeling fully part of the rhythm of kindling and nourishment. You continue the measured progress of your day, leaving the hearth and finding yourself standing before the dressing area. The movement is slow, a deliberate act that requires gathering several folded layers of cloth. You reach for the linen shifts first, handling them with an economy of motion. These simple tunics are not meant for outward display. They are a foundational barrier against the elements and against the rough skin of your own body. As you lift one, you notice the pale, natural sheen of the fibers, which carry the faintest scent of boiled starch and subtle lye soap, the remnants of cleansing. The feel of the linen against your wrists is cool at first, a stark contrast to the lingering residual warmth on your skin from the morning's chores. You slip it over your head, feeling the way the material falls into place, smoothing itself against the skin beneath. It is weightless, yet necessary. After this base layer, you must put on the tunic of wool. This piece is thicker, sturdier, and carries a more complex scent, a mixture of the lanolin used in its care, the earthiness of the sheep from which it came, and perhaps a ghost note of wood smoke absorbed from storage. You notice that these garments are far from being simply covering. They are an acknowledgement. They mark your place within this community, even if subtly. The weave, the color, these details whisper who you are when no words are spoken aloud. You pull the sleeves down over your forearms, observing how the sturdy wool gathers at the wrist, providing both warmth and a certain structured dignity to your hands. The process of dressing is not a single action, but a series of careful fittings. Each layer must be situated correctly for maximum comfort and protection throughout the day's necessary exertions. Over the tunic, you slide on the outer gown or cot. This garment is perhaps the most visible piece, designed to give structure to your silhouette when passing through public view. You adjust the fit at the shoulders, feeling the subtle pull of the stitching across your upper back. As you work slowly through these layers, paying attention to how each one meets and overlaps with the last, you find yourself noticing small details about the clothing itself. A particular patch on the hemline might be slightly darker due to repeated contact with damp earth. A subtle fraying near an elbow might suggest a difficult day or unexpected task. These minor imperfections are not seen as faults, but rather as a continuous record of your lived life, worn into the fabric like memories. When all the layers are in place, the smooth linen base, the warming wool beneath, and the structured outer gown, you pause for a moment simply to stand still. You feel the weight of the combined cloth around you. It is substantial. It gives resistance to movement, requiring a mindful consideration with every step that follows. This physical act reminds you how much time and skilled labor goes into the simple right to be covered. No one merely gets dressed. There is an intricate system in place. The shearing of sheep, the spinning of thread, the dyeing using local barks and berries, the weaving on a loom. You observe the way the natural materials react to the cool air, how the wool seems to absorb it differently than the linen, how both settle around you with varying degrees of crispness. You reach out and gently touch the fabric over your forearm. The material is rougher here than at the shoulder, a tactile contrast that informs you about its structural purpose. It is designed not just to keep the cold out, but also to provide an appropriate visual language for the community viewing you passing by. A simpler cloth suggests a different station in life than one dyed with imported pigment. The act shifts your internal rhythm toward patience. There is no rush here. The day's momentum does not demand speed. It demands readiness. You find yourself contemplating the function of clothing beyond simple modesty or warmth. It is a portable shell of identity, connecting you to the generations who wore the same basic patterns and fabrics on the exact spot where you now stand. You move next to a small basin for washing your hands and forearms. The water, drawn perhaps from a nearby well, has a distinct metallic chill that makes you draw in a slow breath before plunging your hands into it. You use the coarse soap, a mixture likely containing wood ash and rendered fat, and begin to wash away the fine film of dust accumulated overnight. The scent is sharp and alkaline, cutting through any lingering wood smoke or stale sleep smells. The scrubbing feels necessary, a ritual cleaning that moves beyond mere hygiene. It seems to cleanse the accumulation of the previous night's exhaustion. As you dry your hands on a piece of coarse linen, the fabric itself speaking of hard use, you look out towards the opening leading from the dwelling. The light outside is steadily increasing now, chasing away the deep grays and blues of pre-dawn. The sun has not crested the roofs yet, but it promises its passage. Your body, encased in multiple layers of protective cloth, feels grounded, prepared for the journey ahead. This quiet routine of preparation settles you into a rhythm that matches the steady, predictable pulse of your community's life, setting the tone for moving outward into the day's demands and exchanges. You feel the unfamiliar firmness beneath your worn leather soles. They are not soft, modern shoes, but heavy things, built to withstand more than gentle pavements. A new weight settles around your ankles as you step out of the sheltered threshold and onto the open air. The scent that greets you is immediate and complex, a sharp blend nothing like what filtered into the home moments ago. It carries the tang of livestock waste, yes, but beneath it are layers of wood smoke that have settled deep into every nook, mixed with the faint, sweet-sour smell of unwashed wool and human sweat. The air itself feels different here, thicker with movement and life. You adjust your pace instinctively, recognizing the uneven give underfoot. The cobblestones rise and fall beneath your steps, not smoothly polished stone, but rugged blocks fitted together by time and necessary labor. With each step, you hear a precise, percussive sound, the steady thump of heel meeting stone, followed by the slight scraping grit that always accompanies such uneven surfaces. You find yourself moving into the rhythm established by those around you, a constant stream of purposeful footfalls. There is no destination or great urgency, only the necessary flow of life continuing its daily circuit. You pass goods being hauled on small carts, and the friction of the wooden wheels against the stones creates a deeper, grating sound that momentarily overrides the quiet patter of your own steps. You look down at the way the morning light catches the grit embedded in the stone near your feet. These cobblestones have seen countless generations of footsteps. They retain the memory of every heel and passing cartwheel. You notice how some stones are darker, worn smooth by centuries of constant friction, while others are rougher, perhaps recently laid or simply less trafficked. The flow continues around you. Some people walk with a quick, brisk pace, their errands demanding efficiency, while others move much more slowly, pausing occasionally to observe the passing sight or to speak quietly to another. You begin to notice the small details of their passage, the way a child darts past your legs, trailing dust and energy, the slow, steady trudge of someone heavily laden with woven baskets on their arms. As you move further from the comparative shelter of the main thoroughfare, the composition of smells shifts. The initial overwhelming mixture begins to thin out. You catch the distinct, pungent scent of wood smoke mixed with clean straw emanating from a bakery stall. And then closer by, the rich, earthy smell of fresh manure mixed with the damp decay of autumn leaves pushed into a rut. You lift your gaze as you move deeper into the streetscape. The buildings pressing close on either side are not uniform. They lean against each other in an ancient embrace. Their lower levels are often made of stone, cool, dark, and solid to the touch, while the upper stories seem haphazardly constructed, a mix of wattle and daub and timber framing that speaks of continuous, piecemeal growth over decades, if not centuries. You instinctively feel for the folds of your clothing, the thick wool or linen resisting the chill air despite the rising sun. The weight of your multiple layers feels less like a burden and more like a kind of necessary armor against the elements and the casual grime of public life. It reminds you of how every aspect of existence here, the clothes, the food, the very dwelling, is built for persistence. The collective soundscape becomes an intricate tapestry woven from small noises. You hear the rhythmic clanging that might come from a smithy further down the street, a sharp, metallic punctuation mark against the quieter background hum. Nearby, the low murmur of voices rises and falls, small conversational ripples accompanying the steady rush of passers-by. It is not chaos. It is an overwhelming sense of structured coexistence. You slow your steps slightly, simply to register the feeling of the stones again through the soles of your feet. Each stone has its own slight irregularity, demanding a subtle shift in balance, engaging muscles that are used to the predictable evenness of flatter ground. It takes constant, low-level concentration just to proceed smoothly. The cobblestones feel cool and absorbent beneath you, drawing the warmth from your boots little by little. This coolness is fundamental to the daily life here. It dictates pace, influences footing, and contributes one more subtle layer to the pervasive smell of wet earth. The air carries the faint mineral scent of underground dampness mixed with human effort. Observing the people passing by, you notice patterns in their movement. Those whose steps are briskest tend to be carrying things, market purchases or necessary goods back home, their focus directed entirely downward at the ground and forward to their immediate task. Others walk more leisurely, heads tilted up, taking in the architecture, perhaps pausing for a fleeting conversation with someone standing near a doorway. This gentle observation of rhythm becomes meditative. You realize that every step you take is part of an unimaginably long procession of steps taken by others before you. It grounds you not through history books, but through simple, repetitive locomotion. Ahead, the street widens slightly, drawing you toward a central point, a junction where several smaller paths meet the main artery. Here, the mix of smells becomes almost palpable. Spices carried in small pouches mingle with the pervasive scent of coal smoke from chimney pots. The air feels thicker now, richer with commerce. You adjust your stride to match a steady pace coming from an opposing direction. You feel a momentary connection with these strangers, a shared understanding that you are all navigating this same complex physical space at this very moment, each guided by the quiet necessities of survival and routine. The journey is not about reaching any single point. It is about sustaining motion itself. It is about the continuous process of moving from one place to the next, allowing life to accumulate its small textures and scents upon your person until you reach the open heart of the town square. You settle your steps now in the open square, where the air tastes of 100 different lives. This is the heart, the nexus point where necessity meets exchange. The noise you heard just moments ago, a wash of voices and the rhythmic calls of vendors, begins to recede slightly as you move deeper into the market's flow. You are moving with the slow, deliberate cadence of someone who knows exactly where they need to go, yet feels the gentle pull of everything around you. Look at how the stalls are set up. Rough wooden frames supporting goods that speak both of abundance and absolute dependence. Crimson spices are piled high next to dull sacks of grain. Polished earthenware sits beside thick bundles of woven hemp. You pause for a moment simply to absorb the sheer volume of objects, each one having traveled a distance greater than you realize. The market does not merely trade things. It trades sustenance for survival. Your initial focus rests on the edge of your small basket, which holds the few items you plan to exchange today, perhaps some surplus eggs or a handful of preserved berries. Everything about this transaction feels measured, balanced like an ancient scale. You notice how the merchant selling roots has stacked his wares, deep purple turnips alongside pale, sturdy carrots. They catch the uneven light filtering down from overhead awnings. The smell coming off them is distinctly earthy, a scent that reminds you of turned soil and cool groundwater. You breathe deeply, allowing that mineral quality of the air to settle in your lungs. It carries less smoke than the residential areas, but more sweat and wood ash, a unique miasma of commerce. You drift past a stall overflowing with linen scraps. The fabric is varied, some bleached bright white, others dyed in muted shades of faded blues or ochres, colors achieved through natural dyes that speak of time and patience. You reach out lightly, letting your fingertips brush against the texture of the weave. It is coarse beneath your touch, holding the faint history of countless washes. This fabric represents the accumulated effort of many hands. You observe a slight fraying on one corner. It is not damage, but proof of its life lived and use endured. It holds its value precisely because of its wear. As you navigate deeper, observing the rhythm of the shoppers, the quick dart of a child chasing something unseen, the slow, heavy gait of an older person making their way to the corner, all these movements add up to the collective pulse of the community. You watch two people meeting near a wooden barrel. They exchange not goods, but soft words and knowing glances, a transaction more valuable than any piece of spiced pepper or carved wood. They are trading information, news that dictates how they must plan their next few weeks. Your attention turns to a corner where the bartering feels most immediate and raw. A farmer is exchanging a basket of freshly gathered gourds for lengths of sturdy leather belt. The negotiation takes its natural time. You watch the interaction keenly, the slight dipping of heads, the gesturing with open palms, the careful assessment in each other's eyes. It is not about desire. It is about absolute necessity. He needs good leather to reinforce his cart axle. She needs enough nourishment from the gourds to last until the next crop. The value assigned to these goods is determined not by their intrinsic worth alone, but by the depth of the need they satisfy. You approach your chosen stall, perhaps for some dried beans or coarse flour, and begin the quiet process of inquiry. You ask about the quality of the grain, how it was harvested, what local conditions influenced its yield. The vendor smiles, a practiced, weary smile, and explains the difficulties of the recent rains, the patchy nature of the harvest across the rolling fields. Listening to this explanation, You realize that every item in this market carries a detailed narrative of landscape and season. They are not merely commodities, but physical records of agricultural struggle and localized success. The exchange itself becomes a slow ritual. You count out the small copper coins, or perhaps offer another item from your basket, a handful of dried meadow herbs for a measure of beans. The clink of metal against wood is surprisingly loud in the momentary lull between transactions, punctuating the general hum of the market. As you receive the needed goods, their weight feels satisfyingly substantial, not just because they are physical objects, but because they represent the stability of your household for days to come. You carefully place them within your basket, listening to the quiet thud as the bounty settles against whatever already rests there. Passing through the crowded thoroughfare again, you feel a subtle shift in perspective. Having navigated the core economy, you carry with you not just physical goods, but a deeper understanding of interdependence. No single person, not the artisan, not the farmer, nor even the greatest merchant, can thrive alone for long. The wealth is spread thinly across myriad tiny transactions, each one relying on the successful labor and necessity of another. You observe the way the sun, now higher than it was this morning, catches the dust motes dancing in the air between the stalls, making them look like glittering, momentary miracles. This transient light reminds you that life here is similarly composed of brilliant, fleeting moments framed by constant effort. The market's energy starts to modulate as midday passes, and the heat begins to settle into the stone flags beneath your feet. The noise does not cease, but it changes pitch. The urgency gives way to a slower rhythm of resumption. Some people sit down on low wooden stools, sharing scraps or simply resting their weary backs against the pillars that support the awnings. You find yourself slowing your own pace, allowing your breathing to synchronize with the slower tempo around you. It is in this quiet observation that the true lessons reside. The resilience etched into the faces of those who have lived through many seasons and market downturns, the gentle humor visible even amidst exhaustion. This sustained flow of commerce is the invisible mechanism keeping your community fed, clothed, and housed. The rhythm you absorb here today will carry with you, a quiet, steady hum of mutual reliance, as you continue your day's necessary journey. You find yourself standing at the edge of a small workshop, where the air carries the sharp, earthy scent of freshly worked materials. The sounds here are not the general hubbub of the main thoroughfare, but something more focused, more rhythmic, a specialized music that seems to come from within the wood itself. You watch the craftsman in his corner, and your gaze settles on the precise, deliberate movements of his hands. He is bent over a piece of raw material, perhaps shaping wood for coopers, or maybe preparing soft leather strips. The cobbled thoroughfare has quieted now, having carried you from the bustle of the market and past the steady rhythm of the artisan's trade. You find yourself at the edge of a space defined by antiquity, the church. It is not grand in the sweeping marble arches seen in later centuries, but rather solid, hunkered down against time, built of local stone that seems to have absorbed centuries of rain and sun into its very pores. As you approach, the atmosphere changes instantly. The clamor of voices and the scent of spilled goods gives way to a profound hush. You slow your pace, feeling the difference in the ground beneath your worn boots. It is not merely cobbles, but flagstones, polished smooth by countless centuries of sandals and shoes alike. You enter through an unadorned wooden door, heavy and cool beneath your hand. The interior air is noticeably different from the street outside. It smells faint but distinctly, a blend of old smoke from burning candles or oil lamps, a dry, dusty scent of aged wool, and underlying that, the indelible sweetness of burnt incense resins. You move slowly across the floor, which feels cooler underfoot than you expected. The stone radiates a chill up through your soles, reminding you of the season's dampness, but there is also a strange warmth emanating from the deep, structural mass of the building itself. Your eyes adjust to the dim light. It seems to be filtered down and diffused by high, narrow windows, admitting only slivers of pale, watery daylight that barely touch the far walls. You take in the architecture, noticing how every line, the rounded curve of a pillar, the simple archway over an unseen doorway, speaks of endurance and repeated craftsmanship without flourish. These were structures built not for spectacle, but for perpetuity. Pausing near the entrance narthex, you feel the weight of the collective quietude. It is a silence unlike any other, not merely the absence of noise, but a palpable presence of thoughtful stillness. You observe the people around you, moving with an almost studied restraint. There are not grand gestures or dramatic pronouncements. Rather, there is a subtle uniformity to their posture and movement. Many heads are bowed slightly, following the gentle downward curve of attention that characterizes this place. Some stand rooted in contemplation near the altar wall, hands clasped loosely before them, while others move towards the quieter corners, simply allowing the cool air to envelop them. The quiet here is deeply connective, grounding you immediately in a sense of shared community experience and belief that transcends your own immediate concerns. You notice details, the rich but muted tones of the stained glass depicting scenes whose figures seem less like portraits and more like archetypes. The fisherwoman, the weary shepherd, the supplicating child. The colors are deep jewel tones, somewhat faded by age and smoke, suggesting stories told across vast spans of years. Running your hand along a nearby pillar base, you feel the grit under your fingertips, the minuscule particles of minerals shed over time, a tangible record of human presence accumulated on stone. You consider how this simple act of passing through sacred space anchors your understanding of daily life. For these people, the church was not just a location for weekly observance. It was a crucial axis point around which their lives turned, a marker in the calendar, a physical and psychological safety net against the unpredictable vagaries of harvest or sickness. This place represents something larger than yourself, giving rhythm to personal suffering and small joys alike. You walk closer to the central nave, drawn by the deep, solemn scent of age-old sanctity mixed with beeswax candles. You find a stone bench, cool beneath your backside, and simply sit for a time. Your awareness turns inward, registering the steady sound of your own breathing, occasionally punctuated by the soft, rhythmic scrape of someone else's shoe on the flagstones. The very act of pausing here encourages a slow turning of thought away from the immediate necessity of bartering bread or kneading dough, and towards considerations of permanence and devotion. It is a time to acknowledge the invisible scaffolding of their lives, the belief systems that structured everything from birthrights to final farewells. Looking up at the vaulted ceiling, though you cannot see it clearly in the dimness, you imagine the massive weight of stone supporting the roof overhead. It feels like shelter given by faith and engineering. You realize that this architecture itself is a sermon, enduring, necessary, and complexly supportive. You observe how little ornamentation is used where grandiosity might be expected. The focus remains on function, shelter for both body and spirit. This stripped-back reality reinforces the core need of the community: stability. Slowly, you begin to process the sense of shared history that permeates the cool air and weathered stone. You feel connected not just to the people around you now, but to every generation whose feet have trod this same dusty path moments before. The quiet mandate is clear: Existence requires a structure larger than oneself. Gathering your bearings, acknowledging the momentary deep stillness it provided, you finally rise from the bench. With a subtle shift in purpose and pace, you know that your day's necessary movements must continue. You exit the sacred enclosure, stepping back out into the more vibrant, dust-strewn reality of the town. A different rhythm, but one now carrying the echo of profound quietude with it. The stone walls have absorbed a measure of peace, and for a moment that stillness travels with you. The late morning sun, having traveled across the rooftops and alleyways of the town center, now begins to cast a softer, more diffused light. You find yourselves settled upon an edge of ground near what might have once been the outer palisade, a slightly elevated patch of earth that offers a quiet perspective away from the pressing bustle of the market gates. The immediate clamor of transactions, the shouted prices, the heavy clatter of wood, the occasional bleating sheep, has softened into a continuous, murmuring hum like water over stones. You sit on a simple wooden bench or perhaps just upon rough-hewn planks placed across an uneven surface. Before you lies a shared spread, a piece of thick, rustic bread, its crust dark and sturdy from the oven's intense heat, and alongside it several chunks of cheese, perhaps goat's milk or sharp sheep's curd. These are not the elaborate meals imagined in later times, but simple sustenance, the product of immediate necessity and careful preservation. You break off a piece of bread, noting its texture beneath your fingers. The coarse bran mix and the hearty wholemeal flour give it a weight that feels solid, anchoring you to this specific moment, this place, and this time. The scent rising from the loaf is earthy, mingled with the faint, sweet tang of wild yeast and baked grain. It carries memories of the bakehouse earlier in the morning, the warmth of the wood-fired ovens. You are surrounded by others, neighbors who have also gathered for this shared respite. There is no strict formality to the arrangement. People simply settle where space allows, finding comfort in proximity and mutual quietude. Some lean against the weathered stone wall that defines the edge of the ground, their attention fixed on the way the light catches dust motes suspended in the mid-morning air. The cheese remains a visual study in contrast, creamy white melting into deeper, yellowish tones where it has ripened more fully. You observe how one neighbor carefully tears off a small portion, scraping it lightly onto another's bread piece, initiating a quiet exchange of flavor and fellowship. The simple act speaks volumes about the culture of sharing, where material abundance was measured not in accumulation, but in the moment it could be divided among those present. As you take your first bite, the mix of saltiness from the cheese and the slightly sour tang of the bread fills your mouth. It is intensely satisfying sustenance, requiring no complex preparation beyond baking or simple curdling. You realize how much effort went into achieving this simplicity. The fields where the barley grew, the animals that provided the milk, the hands that milled the grain, and finally, the heat contained within the hearth until it could transform the raw ingredients. Your attention drifts momentarily to the neighboring activity. Near a stack of firewood, two younger individuals are quietly picking through a basket of roots or perhaps gathered wild herbs. They work with a delicate efficiency, knowing precisely what is needed for tinctures, poultices, and seasonal cooking. You note the ingrained knowledge in their movements, the way they kneel without strain, the practiced curve of their fingers as they pull medicinal leaves from the damp earth. There is a quiet observation about time itself here, a sense that it moves not according to man's frantic schedules, but according to the cycles of sun and season. This midday meal settles into that slow rhythm. The conversation, when it happens, does not leap across topics or argue deeply. Rather, it drifts like smoke, gently from one practical matter to the next. Discussions turn toward the state of the harvest fields further out, the recent movements of cattle on the common pasture, or perhaps a shared concern about the shifting prices at the grain mill. The words spoken are weighted with necessity and communal interest. Each observation carried in conversation serves as both information and reassurance. When you hear one person speak of their eldest child's need for sturdy new boots, it is immediately understood that this speaks to the broader theme of generational continuity, the constant effort required to sustain life through repeated rounds of growth and labor. It brings back a feeling of deep contemplation regarding cycles. The seed planted must grow into a plant. The milk given must nourish a child. The bread eaten today fuels the strength for tomorrow's work. You notice that this pattern of sustenance, both physical and metaphorical, was interwoven with life itself. There is an undeniable thread connecting the meager bite of cheese to the potential need for many children, the continuity of bloodlines being viewed as a vital agricultural harvest in its own right. The air around you becomes slightly warmer from the combined presence of people, warmed by the persistent high sun. You feel the rough weave of your clothing against your skin, the layered comfort that keeps out more than just the chill of night or early morning dew. These garments, though practical, also serve to insulate you from the sudden shifts in environment and status, maintaining a kind of personal boundary within the shared space. You lean back slightly, letting the simple reality of the meal settle over you, the wholesome taste of the bread, the salt sharpness of the cheese, the gentle resonance of murmured conversation around shared survival. You observe the faces around you, etched with the lines of labor and resilience. Every crease tells a story not of dramatic hardship, but of persistent routine, rising before dawn, enduring the cold, preparing, moving, working, and sharing this necessary midday meal. The feeling is one of grounded completeness. The world does not offer grand spectacles or quick triumphs. It offers dependable cycles. The nourishment you consume reinforces an understanding that life here was structured around maintaining a steady state. Enough food to last until the next harvest, strong bodies to work the fields, and families large enough to ensure that the effort would never cease. As your stomach settles, a quiet peace descends, contrasting sharply with the contained energy of the town just beyond your viewing point. You are anchored here, in this small patch of sunlit ground, participating in the oldest human ritual, gathering together to eat bread and talk about living. The subtle philosophy that emerges from this simple meal is one of collective dependence. No single person can achieve or maintain a life force by individual effort alone. It requires the shared fields, the communal mill, the market transaction, and most fundamentally, the constant participation of many hands, generating families meant to repeat those hands in generations yet unborn. You take another bite, savoring the weight of that understanding, the enduring rhythm of medieval existence, simple, profoundly resilient, and always continuing. The late afternoon sun, having drifted past its zenith, now angles through the small window opening, casting long strips of yellow light across the packed earthen floor. You carry a heavy wooden bucket, the leather straps worn smooth by generations of hands. The water source is perhaps a communal well or a slow-running river stream, and the weight of the pail feels familiar in your grip. It requires steady effort, and even balance to distribute the cool, damp weight through your wrists and shoulders. Each step taken toward the water carries you further into the quiet rhythm of necessary labor. You notice how the air changes as you move away from the clustered streets toward the edge where the common path begins. The smells mix. Wood smoke carried on a gentle breeze mixes with the clean, sharp scent of wet earth and fresh river minerals. You approach the wellhead, recognizing the familiar groan of the wooden pulley beam that has served your community for decades. It is an object of endurance, built not for beauty, but purely for function. The process of drawing the water begins slowly. The rope feels fibrous beneath your palms, slightly gritty from mineral dust and natural wear. You guide the bucket down into the deep coolness below, listening to the faint splash that echoes up through the shaft. This sound is strangely comforting, a dependable punctuation mark in the long symphony of day-to-day life. Once the bucket is heavy with its cool bounty, hauling it up demands a measured effort, drawing your muscles against gravity. The water itself feels immensely cold against your hands as you lift it, a chill that seems to seep through your woven garments and remind you of the constant presence of the seasonal climate. You walk back towards the dwelling, moving with an economy of motion born from countless such journeys. Upon arriving, you feel the weight shift slightly, less purely physical than something more ingrained, the knowledge of what this water represents. It sustains cooking, washing, and life itself. The immediate task is to empty its contents into the large, rough wooden trough kept near the washing area. You watch the stream run clear, reflecting the muted tones of the stone walls overhead. The next station requires a different kind of strength, scrubbing and cleaning. There are scraps of lye soap here, made from hardwood ash and rendered fat. It is not soft or scented like modern washes. It has a sharp, alkaline smell that speaks purely of chemistry and utility. You take a rough woolen cloth and work the stiff liquid into the water. The residue is milky and smells faintly mineralic. This process, cleaning anything thoroughly, whether clothing or implements, is labor-intensive, requiring friction and patience. You move to separating threads and sorting fibers. Perhaps there are lengths of wool that need careful beating, or scraps of linen needing separation from stray plant matter. Your fingers become intimately acquainted with the specific texture of natural materials. You distinguish between the soft pile of a sheep's fleece destined for children's garments and the coarser, sturdier wool intended for outerwear, noting slight variations in color and thickness. This detailed work teaches you about cycles, the cycle of growth, the flax or fleece, the cycle of preservation, drying these materials properly, and the cycle of use and decay. Everything eventually returns to earth, but until then, it must be managed with meticulous care. A slight pause brings a reflective moment, taking in the organized mess of tools nearby. Smooth grinding stones for grain, wooden ladles scarred by years of heat, bundles of dried herbs awaiting preparation. Each object tells a story of routine maintenance and enduring necessity. Later, you might attend to the grindstone. If there is stored grain that needs turning into flour, the vital white powder needed for bread or gruel, you guide the heavy pestle against the resistant stone. It is a methodical process, generating a rhythmic sound. Crunch, grind, crunch, grind. The air fills with the scent of toasted seeds and nutty sweetness mixed with the dust of the millstone. You observe the fine, pale powder accumulating in your palm, a substance that transformed hard kernel into readily usable sustenance. This simple act connects you directly to the ancient understanding of caloric transformation. As the afternoon wanes, bringing the shadows closer to those long forms mentioned earlier, you might also be involved in food preparation itself, beyond the initial meal. Perhaps it is preparing for storage, laying out dried vegetables to cure beneath a gentle current of air, or sorting fallen apples from the outer orchards into baskets for keeping through the lean months. The physicality of these tasks, bending low over the trough, kneeling on the packed earth while beating fiber, standing steady and careful at the grindstone, is exhausting in a deeply satisfying way. Your joints ache slightly, but it is an ache earned by skilled hands executing necessary work that keeps the household functioning smoothly. You might sit for a moment afterward, allowing your breath to slow, listening only to the distant, muffled sounds of the town settling down. The memory of the steady crunch grind from the millstone echoes softly. These domestic tasks are not merely chores. They are repositories of specialized knowledge. They embody chemical understanding, knowing how lye works on protein fibers, biological necessity, understanding crop cycles, and engineering skill, managing water pressure or grain capacity. The quiet wisdom gleaned from these manual repetitions is that life here is predicated entirely upon proficiency. There is no room for carelessness, only constant vigilance and practiced rhythm. You realize that the ability to simply keep clothes clean enough, flour ground fine enough, and water flowing steady enough defines success and survival in this world. It's a deep understanding of systems, woven into the fabric of your everyday movements. The methodical nature of your labor grounds you, anchoring you firmly to the rhythm of the land and the predictable requirements of human existence. The angle of the sun has changed subtly, marking a turn in the day that you barely register until it is fully realized. You find yourself walking along the main thoroughfare again, but this time the energy propelling your steps is different. It is not the brisk urgency of necessity that guided you from the market or the church. Rather, it is the steady, measured cadence of completion. The sun begins its descent, and with it comes a transformation in the quality of the light over the town. What was once a bright, even illumination now seems to stretch and deepen across everything. The cobblestones under your worn boots seem to drink up the failing light, transforming the dull gray slate into tones of ochre and soft rust. Each uneven step sends up a faint puff of dust that catches the slanted rays, making the ground appear less like solid stone and more like something faintly glowing. You find yourself noticing how much detail this particular quality of light reveals. The small chips of colored tile near a wellhead, the subtle green patina on an old wrought iron latch, the deep brown stain where water has seeped into wood over centuries. All are suddenly visible under the lengthened shadow. The air cools with the receding sun, bringing with it a distinct shift in scent. The mingled odors of the day, the sharp brine from fish stalls, the heavy sweetness of stale bread, the earthy smell of stacked dung used for fertilizer, begin to settle and concentrate. You breathe deeper than you did hours ago, noticing the unique blend now. The cooling stone dust mixed with wood smoke that seems to have lingered in every chimney flue, and the fainter, cleaner scent carried on a slight evening breeze. Passing by homes, you see where the day's activity has begun to draw inward. Windows, which were open slits of yellow light at midday, are now steadily darkening. There is a palpable slowing down, a collective settling into the rhythm of the approaching night. You observe the way people walk. Their shoulders seem heavier, their pace more deliberate than when they left your home this morning. The work that sustained them has been accomplished, and now the physical exertion requires patience to dissipate. As you pass by the cooper's shop, the scent of wet oak becomes more pronounced. You glance at the stacked barrels near the doorway, noting the wear on their staves, the slight uneven gaps where the wood has expanded and contracted over many seasons. The rich, woody smell speaks of containment, of preservation, a necessity that dictated both architecture and daily life. It is a reminder of how completely every aspect of existence was shaped by immediate needs: storage for food, protection from elements, structure for permanence. The shadows are the most telling element right now. They do not simply lengthen. They seem to gain weight. An object, such as an upturned cartwheel or a slumped laundry line, casts a silhouette that is exaggerated and almost sculptural against the glowing warmth of the fading sky. You watch how these elongated shapes appear fragile yet definite, physical evidence of time passing across space. These shadows hold the memory of light, proving its existence just moments ago. You continue slowly down the street toward the familiar quadrant of your neighborhood. The sounds change as well. The high pitch of market chatter fades into intermittent murmurs, and the muffled clatter of household goods being carried. You hear the soft, rhythmic thud slap of a baker closing his shutters for the evening, or the gentle creak of a gate latch securing at dusk. Every corner you turn reveals a deepened sense of quietude. The business of earning and exchanging has ceased. The time now belongs to reflection and recovery. You feel the accumulated weight in your own limbs, the slight ache in your knees from walking over uneven stones, the tiredness in your wrists from the steady tasks of the day. This physical fatigue serves as a gentle anchor, grounding you firmly in the immediate reality of that specific moment, under that particular light. You slow your pace near the edge of the main path, where the town gives way to fields and rougher tracks. The contrast is striking. The contained density of human life against the expansive emptiness just beyond the last stone wall. The shadows lengthen dramatically here too, swallowing the edge of the world into deep blue-black tones. It makes you consider the boundaries, the careful line drawn between the cultivated order of the community and the vast indifference of the countryside. The path behind you is worn smooth by countless footsteps, a historical groove cut through the earth. You realize that your own passage right now is simply an ephemeral ripple on this deep current of daily life. Your movements are momentary, but they adhere to the rhythm established by those who walked here yesterday and those who will walk here tomorrow. It prompts a quiet contemplation about the sheer physical commitment required just to exist day after day. The continuous loop, wake in the cold, labor through the smoke, manage the trade, perform the necessary rites, and then walk home until dusk claims the sky again. There is no grand dramatic conclusion to this cycle, merely the gentle transition from one state of being to the next, from light to shadow, from activity to repose. This endless rhythm suggests a profound stability, a bedrock resilience that anchors human life in a world that often feels untamed and unpredictable. The day's tasks, simple as gathering firewood or kneading bread dough, are not just means of survival. They are the very structure of your existence, defining time itself through repetition. You walk on, allowing the cool evening air to settle over you. You notice the contrast between the warmth retained in some stones and the coolness seeping up from others. Your skin feels responsive to these tiny changes in temperature, a constant reminder of the environment's subtle power. The last traces of orange light catch the corner of a thatched roof or glint off a puddle, making them temporarily luminous points against the approaching indigo sky. The walk home is less about distance covered and more about time measured, the slow, inevitable march toward evening. You breathe in that final, cooling air, carrying with you the accumulated sensory details of the long day. The smell of cedar smoke, the grit of stone dust, the taste of simple nourishment shared amongst neighbors. These details do not fade. They are simply folded into the quieter awareness that settles over you as you finally approach your own threshold, ready to prepare for the slow ritual of nightfall. The last slivers of sun have dropped below the rooftops across the narrow street, and a profound stillness begins to settle over everything. The day's hurried pace, marked by the scraping sounds of tools and the steady murmur of voices, has slowed into a deep, contemplative hush. You feel the collective exhalation of the community as they retreat from the public square back into the intimate boundaries of their homes. You notice how the light that remains is not bright, but rather muted, carrying the reddish-gold hue of settling dust and cooling stone. Your muscles ache gently with the cumulative effort of the day, the uneven pavement under your boots, the bending at the well, the weight of woven baskets. These aches are simply part of the rhythm, a physical testament to the continuity required by life in this place. You drift back toward the hearth, which has been diligently kept alive throughout the afternoon. The heat radiating from the banked coals is far more comforting than any roaring blaze. It is a deep, persistent warmth that penetrates through your thick outer layers and into the marrow of your bones. You kneel down beside the embers, careful not to let your fingertips touch the hot ash. The scent here is potent, a rich mixture of burnt wood, sweet smoke that has mellowed over time, and the earthy smell of banked ashes. You gently survey the remaining fuel, small sticks of kindling that need nursing, and thicker pieces of oak whose deep burning quality you rely upon. This final act of tending the fire feels less like maintenance and more like a ritual declaration, a promise to ward off the creeping chill of the night. There is a methodical grace in stoking the embers. You use your iron poker with slow, deliberate movements, pushing aside flakes of gray ash and adjusting the arrangement of the wood so that the nascent flames can rise again, steadily and predictably. Each gentle push requires concentration, a focused quietude that seems to settle into your very bones. You consider the necessity of this remaining warmth. It is not merely for comfort. It is vital for both preserving the household goods and providing the necessary heat against the damp night air, especially when the structure itself feels porous and permeable. Once the fire has settled back into a steady glow, you turn your attention to the final tasks of closing down the day. You move through the house with practiced efficiency. Maybe there are bundles of firewood stacked in the cool corner, awaiting their turn. You select those that burn cleanly, checking for any signs of damp rot or splintering weakness. Perhaps old tools need cleaning. The wooden kneading board scored deep from countless meals, the iron pot bearing the faint char marks of yesterday's stew. You take a coarse linen cloth and begin wiping down surfaces, noticing how grime accumulates in the deepest crevices of every daily object. The smell of this clean, though dusty, effort is strangely satisfying. Then comes the quiet ritual of mending. Perhaps there is a tear in your outer tunic, or a spot weakened by wear on a neighbor's blanket. You sit down near a low wooden bench, the light catching the fine threads of wool and linen. The needle passes through the damaged fabric with a rhythmic thwip-thwip-thwip, pulling the remaining fibers back into line. This simple act of reinforcing cloth speaks volumes about life here. Nothing is truly discarded. Every piece holds value, requiring careful attention until it can fulfill its purpose again. You feel the familiar drag of concentration, an enduring task that anchors you firmly in your own domestic history. As darkness gathers outside, pressing against the thin walls of the dwelling, you look toward the hearth one last time. The low light reflects off the polished stones and casts long, gentle shadows against the packed earth floor. You are mindful of the quiet weight of the day's needs, the stored grains in the wooden trough, the livestock sheltered outside, the necessary preservation of warmth. These small actions, the scraping clean, the mending, the feeding of coals, are not just tasks. They are a continuous negotiation with scarcity and time. You move into the final preparations for rest. The process is slow and deliberate. You adjust the layers of your own sleeping garments, remembering how cool the air will become once the last flicker of visibility fades entirely. These layered clothes, worn even to bed, are an inherited necessity against a climate that does not spare any creature. They provide insulation, yes, but they also speak to a deep cultural understanding of maintaining warmth and propriety within one's own skin. The entire preparation for night is colored by this realization. The sheer amount of effort invested in sustaining such a large, necessary life force under challenging conditions. You observe your hands resting on your knees, noting the fine tracery of lines etched there, lines that are maps of countless preparations and tireless routines. The physical reality of daily survival demands not only robust energy, but an unwavering commitment to structure. A gentle quiet settles around you now, punctuated only by the occasional soft hiss from the embers or the whisper of wind through a poorly sealed window frame. You take a slow breath, drawing in the cool air that carries the scent of spent smoke and old wood. It is in this moment of winding down, surrounded by the evidences of day's work, the polished pots, the repaired cloth, the glowing, contained heat, that you feel the quiet weight of history settle upon your shoulders. Life here proceeds not with sudden bursts of drama, but with an endless sequence of small, disciplined acts. These simple preparations are what allow the rhythm of life to continue, day after enduring day, and so must it do until the sun rises again. The last remnants of daylight filter through the narrow opening you have created in the dwelling wall. You move slowly, drawn by the gentle promise of warmth emanating from this spot near the window frame. The air here is noticeably cooler than the small pool of heat that gathers around the hearth stones, but it holds a different quality, a suspension of temperature and time. Settling down onto the rough wooden bench nearby, you settle into the quiet rhythm of the closing day. The light itself changes things. What was bright yellow when you first arrived now has deepened to a soft, fading ochre. It angles across the packed earth floor and catches the dust motes suspended in the air, making them visible as tiny, slow-dancing specks. You watch this play of light for a long moment, observing how gravity seems to pull at the remaining color from the sky and into the sheltering space of your home. The scent profile shifts again, too. The sharper, mingled odors of the market and the street no longer cling to you. They are replaced by something deeper, more settled. You detect the faint, sweet-sour aroma of wood smoke mixed with rendered fat from the day's cooking, underpinned by the dry, earthy smell of packed dirt that has been warmed all afternoon. It is a scent of sustenance and containment. You notice your hands settling into a stillness you hadn't felt since breakfast. The physical movements of the day, the carrying of water, the kneading of dough, the weight of goods at the market, all soften their edges. You become acutely aware of the texture of the simple wool skirt covering your legs and the rough linen binding around your waist, garments that feel lived in, softened by endless washing and use. This gathering point is not merely physical, it is a necessary communal anchor. As you sit, others begin to arrive or already occupy similar resting spots nearby. Some are younger, their postures more restless, while others, those who have seen many seasons pass, are folded into themselves, quietly observing the fading light. You feel the gentle weight of shared presence around you. There is no need for forced conversation, nor is there any dramatic recounting of events. The companionship itself is a kind of warm blanket, smoothing out the rough edges of individual fatigue and minor worry. Someone nearby begins to softly recount an observation about a neighbor. Perhaps how young Thomas's stall was unusually empty today, or how Mrs. Alara's goats seemed listless this afternoon. These aren't grand tales. They are small notes on the passing existence of people you know well, forming the gentle tapestry of communal life. Your focus drifts down to the pattern formed by the hearth stones near your feet. You can see the dark charring contrasted against the lighter gray ash that has settled in patches. Every imperfection in the stone speaks of time and repeated heat, a quiet testimony to the thousands of meals, the countless nights, and the continuous human reliance upon this simple source of fire. Observing the faces around you, etched by the day's activities and the passage of years, you notice the shared weight of responsibility. It is visible in the steady gaze of a parent watching the children play nearby, or the slight downturn at the corner of an elder's mouth that seems to hold memories too full for words. The act of storytelling here, sharing small observations about the community, is less about entertainment and more about maintaining social cohesion. It confirms what was seen today, records a minor piece of human history against the backdrop of routine existence. It acknowledges that life continues day after day, despite hardship or scarcity. You become mindful of the body's natural rhythms slowing down in response to this passing light. The collective breathing here is shallower, more measured than when you were actively working through the morning rush. Each person seems to be conserving energy, drawing on the quiet comfort provided by shared humanity and the fading warmth of the fire. Sometimes a hand rests lightly on an arm or shoulder, a gesture that requires no explanation, communicating only the simple reassurance of belonging. These touches are subtle, ephemeral threads woven into the fabric of the evening, confirming your place within this established community structure. You watch a few scraps of discarded material nearby, perhaps a piece of coarse cloth awaiting mending, or a handful of polished stones collected from a walk past the river bend. These objects seem to absorb the day's light and history alike, each bearing an invisible weight that belongs only to the hands that carried it. The sense of deep time settles over you now. You are situated in a moment suspended between effort and rest, memory and anticipation. You reflect on how much of daily existence is defined by these transitional moments, gathering near the window as the light dips, where the immediate demands of survival allow for momentary pauses of quiet observation. This gentle rhythm of sharing stories and noticing small details is what sustains the spirit. It teaches you that life's meaning is not found in singular achievements or sudden events, but in the continuous accumulation of these ordinary moments. The predictable warmth of a shared hearth, the dependable cycle of the sunset, the low murmur of voices recounting harmless daily anecdotes. You absorb the quiet wisdom imparted by this simple gathering. The knowledge that tomorrow's efforts will be structured around similar routines, rising with the chill, coaxing the fire, dressing in layers, walking the familiar stones, and returning to the shared circle when the light begins to fail. The continuity is both demanding and profoundly comforting. The air grows cool again, moving out from under the shelter of the eaves and into the gathering dusk. You draw your knees up slightly, pulling your woven shawl a little closer around your shoulders. Watching the remaining specks of ochre light fade further now, you feel a deep, abiding sense of peace settle in the core of your being. The day has done its necessary work, and tonight, there is only time to simply exist within the circle of shared warmth. The last sliver of yellow light has receded beyond the low rooftops, pulling the rich ochre tones from the sky and draining them into a deep, velvet ink. You settle back against the rough wooden bench where you had been sitting, the cool wood seeping through the thickness of your outer garments. The sounds of the town, which had seemed so constant throughout the day, the distant clanging, the muted murmuring voices, the shift of footsteps on cobblestone, begin to taper off like water draining into a slow trough. Only the low crackle from the banked embers in the hearth remains, a steady breath that punctuates the deepening quiet. The smell changes now, shifting away from the robust, damp scents of the day, the mixing of sweat and spices from the market, the strong tang of wood smoke clinging to fresh cloth, and settling into something more primal. The clean scent of settled ash mixed with cooling stone. You feel the temperature dropping subtly, a gradual release of heat that requires you to pull your layers tighter, perhaps adjusting the fold of linen at your wrist or tucking the edge of your shawl higher around your neck. This shift in thermal comfort signals the deepest part of the evening has arrived. You lift your gaze upward. The canopy above is now a vast expanse of absolute darkness, uninterrupted by the artificial glow that modern life assumes is everywhere. It is an overwhelming blackness, yet it is somehow alive with luminous dust. There are no streetlights to diffuse the brilliance. Every point of light seems immediate, crisp, and utterly remote. You take a slow breath, inhaling deeply enough to feel the air cool in your lungs. This altitude change of focus, from the intimate enclosure of the dwelling to the infinite expanse above, is profound. The silence that accompanies this immensity is not empty, it is full. It holds the weight and density of countless years of undisturbed looking. You watch a single star, brilliant white and steady, pulse against the surrounding black velvet. Its light has traveled an enormous distance just to meet your eye right now, settling in this moment over your head. Consider the scale of it. The tiny, bright spark overhead existed when empires rose and fell, when men walked exactly where you stand right now, and when humanity was barely forming its first communities. This celestial mechanism operates with a quiet indifference to the fleeting routines of human life. You notice how little your own small form seems against this backdrop of cosmic machinery. It is a feeling that carries no panic, only deep observation. Your mind wanders back briefly to the long day, the careful weight of water sloshing in the bucket at the well, the repetitive pull on the millstone, the quiet satisfaction of finding good, sturdy roots near the town wall. These activities, so thoroughly rooted and necessary for mere existence, contrast sharply with the timeless sweep of the galaxy above you. This is where time loses its rigid human measure. The careful calculation required to stretch a basket, or the simple act of bartering excess grain at the market, suddenly seems like such a beautifully contained loop. You are anchored in this single spot, observing the cyclical rhythm, the rising and falling of your own heartbeat against the unmoving glow of distant suns. This stability is part of what makes human life feel both so manageable and profoundly brief. You shift slightly on the rough bench. The stone floor beneath it, though cool to the touch, seems steady and immutable. You can almost sense the centuries of footsteps that have passed over this exact spot, the quick steps of a market day rush, the slow tread of an evening wanderer, the careful gait of someone returning from the fields. Every life lived within these familiar walls has contributed to this enduring structure, passing through similar rhythms. The rising smoke with new kindling, the methodical rhythm of kneading bread, the solemn passage through the chapel doorway. These patterns provide a scaffold for the spirit, a dependable choreography against the chaotic backdrop of unpredictable fortune. You lift your gaze back to the stars, allowing yourself a moment simply to exist in that overwhelming quietude. You remember the sheer necessity of surviving day after day, child after child, year after year. It is an act of tremendous endurance, sustained by layers, the thick wool protecting against night cold, the multiple skirts protecting against grit, the continuous lineage passing through your own body. The profound simplicity of that biological and communal rhythm becomes evident when contrasted with the vast, indifferent spread above. The necessity of reproduction, the sheer weight of life continuing in cycles, seems not merely an individual urge, but a participation in this cosmic persistence. You are part of something immense, connected by gravity and time, far beyond the cobbled paths and smoky hearths. The feeling is one of deep belonging, yet also gentle diminishment. The human concerns, the next harvest, the rising cost of salt, the comfort of your immediate family, are valuable things that demand daily attention. They require structure and care, much like keeping a flame alive when the wood is damp. But against the backdrop of night, they are just small points of warmth in an endless, cold wash of light. You let your focus soften again, allowing the immensity of the sky to gently lull you toward stillness. The breath deepens and smooths out, syncing with the barely audible crackle of the dying embers. You feel the physical exhaustion accumulated over a day lived fully, the tension in your shoulders from carrying goods, the ache in your feet from uneven stone. Yet there is a quiet kind of peace that settles over you now, a feeling born not of deep sleep, but of having reached a profound state of settled being. The rhythm slows further, matching the deepest sigh of the ancient stone and the slow turning of the distant heavenly spheres. Everything